So imagine a battlefield, right? But with no tanks, no fighter jets, and absolutely no aircraft carriers.
Right. None of the traditional stuff.
Exactly. The terrain itself, it isn't a dense jungle or a desert. It is entirely man-made. I mean, it consists of just billions of lines of code.
Yeah, and it's constantly shifting.
Right. Shifting, updating, reconfiguring itself while you are actively trying to fight on it. And here is the truly wild part, the part that should really, make the hairs on the back of your neck stand up.
Oh, absolutely.
The front line of this war isn't thousands of miles away on some foreign shore. It's the water treatment plant down the street from your house.
Right.
Or, the banking app on your phone. Or the electrical grid keeping your neighborhood warm right now. And defending that front line is a military apparatus that's currently using, bureaucratic rule books written before the internet was even invented.
Which is just a terrifying mismatch, right,
Yeah.
of capabilities versus reality. I mean, you have an adversary maneuvering in milliseconds and a defense apparatus maneuvering in fiscal quarters.
It's exactly the problem we're tackling today. So welcome to the Deep Dive. I'm so glad you're here with us. We're looking at a stack of sources you brought us today.
Yeah, specifically the June 2026 CSIS Commission on U.S. Cyberforce Generation Summary Report.
Right.
And along with some incredibly detailed supplementary analytical notes.
Today, we are looking at the architectural blueprint to just completely rip up those legacy military rule books. I mean, we're going to unpack the proposed creation of a brand new independent branch of the United States military.
The U.S. Cyberforce.
Yes. We're talking about a highly specialized, just fundamentally radicalized force of about 30,000 digital warriors.
It is arguably the most significant proposed restructuring of American military power since they created the Air Force after World War II.
Wow, really?
Yeah, I mean, it challenges almost every preconceived notion we have about how a military is supposed to look, who is supposed to serve in it, and, how it spends its money.
And before we get deep into the weeds of how you build a military branch from scratch, I really want to drop a huge organic thank you to today's sponsors, CISO, marketplace.com, and securitycareers.help.
Two really great resources.
Absolutely. Because if you are a listener navigating the intersection of technology, defense, and security, these platforms are just essential, whether you're looking to understand the tools defending our infrastructure or figuring out where your unique technical skills fit into the broader security landscape.
They provide exactly the kind of targeted resources we'll be talking about today.
Exactly. You'll hear exactly why bridging that gap between civilian tech and security is so vital when we get into the civilian integration piece of this new force. So, okay, let's unpack this.
To understand where this CSIS blueprint is taking us,
Right.
we really have to look at the wreckage of the current system.
Right.
I mean, we have to understand why the old way is fundamentally structurally broken.
Right.
Right now, U.S. military cyber capabilities, they are not unified. They're scattered. You have cyber operators in the Army, the Navy, the Air Force, and the Marine Corps.
And on paper, to a layperson, that might sound fine, right? You might think, well, every branch uses computers, so every branch needs hackers.
Yeah, it sounds logical.
But the sources point out a fatal flaw in that logic. None of those existing branches prioritize cyber force generation. And it makes sense when you look at their DNA, right?
Right.
The Army's institutional culture, its budget, its promotion boards, they all prioritize land combat, taking and holding physical dirt. The Navy prioritizes maritime dominance.
Because if you're a Navy admiral, your metric of success is the number and readiness of ships in the water.
Exactly. Cyber in those legacy environments is treated as a secondary supporting function, like a specialized IT desk that just helps the actual warfighters communicate.
And that leads to absolute chaos because you have the Army training its cyber operators one way, the Navy training theirs another way, and the Air Force doing, something else entirely. Yeah. You have wildly inconsistent recruiting standards, disjointed career paths, and just a total lack of unified doctrine. And all of that chaos rolls uphill to United States Cyber Command, or Cybercom.
Which is the four-star command actually tasked with fighting digital battles. And here is where we hit a massive, historically significant structural paradox.
The Goldwater-Nichols Act.
Yes. The sources lean heavily into this. Let's provide some context for you on why this act exists, because it is essentially the linchpin of this entire argument. Back in 1980, the U.S. attempted a hostage rescue mission in Iran called Operation Eagle Claw.
Right, and it was a catastrophic failure.
It was. Largely because the Army, Navy, Air Force, and Marines couldn't effectively coordinate or communicate with each other. They were just way too siloed. So Congress passed Goldwater-Nichols to force joint cooperation.
And the mechanism they used to force that cooperation was a strict separation of powers. Goldwater-Nichols established a hard line between the people who generate the forces.
Meaning the military services like the Army and Navy who recruit, train, and equip the troops, right?
Exactly. A hard line between them and the people who employ the forces. Like the combatant commanders, say, Central Command or Cyber Command, who actually take those trained troops and fight the wars.
Checks and balances.
Exactly. The idea is that the trainer shouldn't be the fighter, and the fighter shouldn't be burdened with running boot camp.
Keep the factory that builds the soldiers separate from the general who commands them on the battlefield. I mean, it makes perfect logical sense.
It does, in the physical world. But because there is no dedicated cyber service acting as that factory, cybercom is suffocating.
How so?
Well, cybercom is a combatant command. It's supposed to just fight the battles. But because the Army, Navy, and Air Force are handing them operators with completely mismatched skills, cybercom is increasingly having to take on the burden of force generation.
Oh, I see.
Yeah, they're having to dictate training pipelines, manage personnel assignments, set technical standards, just to ensure they have a usable force. They're actively violating the spirit of the Goldwater-Nichols Act out of sheer desperate necessity.
Wow. It's like trying to win a Grandmaster chess tournament, but you are being forced to use the rule book for a demolition derby.
That's a great way to put it.
I mean, the legacy services are built for physical mass. They measure strength and how many aircraft carrier strike groups they can deploy or how many armored brigades they can move across Europe.
Right.
But cyberspace doesn't care about mass. Cyberspace requires mental velocity. The CSIS report explicitly states that in cyber, the foundational mindset has to be people before platforms.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, we really have to look at the nature of the domain itself. Cyberspace is entirely unique among military domains because it is a constructed domain.
Meaning we built it.
Exactly. The land, the sea, the air, space, those are natural domains. They exist independently of us. If you're an Army infantry unit, your operational cycle is very clear. You train at your home base, you deploy to a physical location overseas for 9 months to execute a mission, and then you rotate back home.
Right, you reset, take leave, repair your gear, and train for the next one.
But cyberspace is man-made. The servers, the fiber optic cables, the routing protocols, we built it all. And because it's interconnected and software-defined, it's constantly changing.
So the terrain you fought on yesterday might be patched and entirely different today.
Exactly. So there is no traditional deployment and reset cycle.
None at all.
Exactly zero. The operators in cybercom don't pack their bags and fly to a digital war zone. They sit at a keyboard in Fort Meade, Maryland, or San Antonio, Texas, and they are effectively on target the moment they log in.
That's intense.
And they stay on target for their entire 2 to 3 year assignment. Operations are unceasing. You're constantly maneuvering, constantly patching, constantly probing, just to maintain your footing against adversary campaigns that never sleep.
Right.
You cannot take the organizational blueprint for an Air Force fighter wing, which is built around occasional high-intensity sorties, and copy-paste it onto a cyber mission force that is essentially engaged in a permanent, continuous firefight.
So the CSIS Commission looked at this broken system and said, we need a clean break. And the solution is an independent Title X military service.
Yes.
For those not deep in the legal jargon, Title X of the U.S. Code is the law that establishes the permanent, regular branches of the armed forces. You know, the Army, Navy, Air Force, Marine Corps, and Space Force. The blueprint here calls for creating the U.S. Cyber Force as a peer to those branches.
And they are very specific about the size and scope. They aren't asking for a sprawling bureaucracy of 500,000 people. The blueprint proposes a lean, highly specialized force of approximately 30,000 personnel.
Let's break that number down because the composition is really fascinating.
Yeah.
It's roughly 20,000 active duty military personnel, 3,500 to 5,000 National Guard members, and 5,000 to 6,000 permanent federal civilians.
Right.
And the initial budget projected to run this new branch is between $10 and $11 billion a year.
Which, crucially, the report points out, is not entirely new taxpayer spending. They propose largely reallocating that 10 to 11 billion from the existing Department of Defense budgets.
Oh, so they're just moving the money around.
Exactly. They were basically saying, take the cyber funding that is currently being mismanaged and diluted across the Army, Navy, and Air Force, pull it out, consolidate it, and give it to a singular command structure that actually knows how to spend it effectively.
I want you to think about your own workplace for a second. Imagine your company has three different departments, say HR, IT, and operations.
Okay.
Now imagine if all three of those departments were hiring software engineers. But HR requires their engineers to run 2 miles every morning. IT requires theirs to know how to sail a boat. And operations just cares if they can code.
Right. It makes no sense.
They use completely different training manuals, they pay them drastically different salaries, and they offer totally different career paths. But at the end of the day, all those engineers are sitting in the exact same room trying to build the exact same software product.
Yeah.
That is the absurdity of the DoD's current cyber dilemma.
It creates massive friction and just terrible morale.
Right.
You literally have an Army operator and a Navy operator sitting shoulder to shoulder at adjacent desks at Cybercom,
Doing the exact same job.
doing the exact same highly classified, highly technical on-net operation against a foreign adversary.
Mm.
But the Army operator is being told they need to go spend 6 months leading a platoon in the mud to get promoted, while the Navy operator is being told they need to go spend 2 years on a ship.
That's wild.
Their career trajectories and their daily realities are totally disconnected from the actual mission they're performing.
Which brings us to the actual design of this new force. If we are building a 30,000-person branch from scratch, and we are acknowledging that human intellect is the primary weapon system rather than heavy machinery, who actually wears the uniform?
Right.
The answer the commission landed on involves breaking one of the oldest, most foundational rules in the history of organized militaries.
They are proposing a military service with absolutely zero enlisted personnel. No privates, no corporals, no sergeants.
Okay, I have to push back hard on this. An army with no enlisted soldiers. That defies the fundamental pyramid structure of every military on Earth for the last 2,000 years.
It does.
The Roman legions had their rank and file. The current U.S. Army has a massive base of hundreds of thousands of enlisted privates and specialists, overseen by a smaller tier of non-commissioned officers, overseen by an even smaller point of the pyramid made up of commissioned officers.
Right, the traditional triangle.
How do you possibly build a functional force of all chiefs and no traditional foot soldiers? Furthermore, isn't the military supposed to be one of the greatest engines for upward mobility in this country?
That's historically been true, yes.
You take an 18-year-old kid from a disadvantaged background straight out of high school, you teach them a trade, give them the GI Bill, and change their life trajectory. This blueprint is essentially saying, no, we only want you if you already have a college degree or elite technical skills. Doesn't that create a profoundly elitist branch of the military? How do you justify shutting that door?
Those are the exact institutional arguments that have prevented this from happening sooner. But let's look at the reality of the domain. That traditional pyramid structure you described, the physical domain absolutely necessitates it.
Because you need bodies.
Exactly. If you need to hold a physical line across 50 miles of territory, you need thousands of riflemen. You need mass. But in cyberspace, mass is totally irrelevant. A single keyboard operator is a strategic asset.
Wow.
The impact of one highly skilled, brilliant coder finding a zero-day vulnerability can equal the impact of an entire armored battalion in the physical world.
So the scale of individual impact is just entirely disproportionate to traditional warfare.
Completely disproportionate.
Okay.
The complexity of offensive and defensive cyber operations demands profound technical mastery. You're going up against the absolute best state-sponsored hackers from Russia, China, Iran, and North Korea.
You can't just send a rookie.
No, you cannot put an 18-year-old with 6 months of basic IT training on the front line against the Chinese advanced persistent threat groups and expect to win. It is not an environment for on-the-job training at the junior level. The stakes, like the national power grid, are simply too high.
So if you don't have enlisted personnel who is doing the actual keyboard work, the sources outline why the current enlisted model is failing so spectacularly. Right now, the military is using enlisted personnel to act as tactical leaders and technical experts.
Yeah.
You have a 22-year-old Air Force senior airman, an E4, doing incredibly sophisticated, highly classified digital exploitation. They are essentially firing digital missiles.
Right.
But because they wear the rank of an E4, they are being paid on an enlisted scale. We are talking a base pay of maybe $2,500 to $3,000 a month.
Which is nothing in that field.
Imagine being that 22-year-old. You are a digital genius. You are living in Maryland near NSA headquarters where the cost of living is astronomical, and you are struggling to pay rent. Meanwhile, Google or a major defense contractor is looking at your resume and offering you $200,000 a year to do the exact same work in the private sector.
Yeah, you can't blame them for leaving.
The paradox is glaring. You cannot expect to keep a world-class digital operator when you are paying them the equivalent of a fast food shift manager just because of an antiquated rank structure.
Exactly. And that is why the Commission looked at the existing U.S. military rank structure and asked, where does profound, specialized, hands-on technical mastery already live?
And the answer is
The Warrant Officer Corps. Warrant officers are not generalist commanders. They are highly specialized, single-track technical experts. They're the chief engineers on ships, the most experienced helicopter pilots, the elite targeting specialists.
Oh, I see.
So the CSIS blueprint mandates that the Cyber Force active duty operational component would consist entirely of warrant officers doing the hands-on keyboard work and commissioned officers handling the command and management.
The report notes that an enlisted operator is often making half the compensation of a newly minted warrant officer. By shifting the entire operational base to the warrant officer pay scale, you immediately solve a massive chunk of the financial disparity.
Exactly.
But the brilliant part isn't just the pay, it's the accession pathway. The new model establishes a distinct technical accession program.
Right. In the legacy military, to become a warrant officer, you usually have to serve several years as an enlisted soldier first, prove yourself, and then apply.
Right.
The Cyber Force would utilize direct appointment. They modeled this concept after the United States Public Health Service Commissioned Corps, or the NOAA Commissioned Officer Corps.
Let's explain that, because most people don't even know those two uniformed services exist. If the government needs a world-class epidemiologist to deploy to a hot zone, they don't make that doctor go to basic training and start as a private. They directly commission them as an officer based on their existing elite civilian expertise.
And the Cyber Force intends to do the exact same thing for technologists. They want the ability to directly appoint mature, highly qualified tech talent straight into a warrant officer role.
Wait, straight in?
Straight in, whether that's an enlisted soldier from the Army who is already a cyber genius and wants to transfer over, or a brilliant 30-year-old civilian software architect from Silicon Valley who wants to serve their country for a few years.
That makes so much sense.
You bring them in, you give them the rank, the respect, and the compensation that their strategic impact actually warrants, without forcing them to endure the irrelevant rites of passage designed for infantrymen.
Okay, so this direct accession pathway for warrant officers solves the entry problem. You pay them better, you give them the appropriate rank, you strip away the bureaucratic nonsense. But that brings up the next massive hurdle. How do you keep them? Let's say you hire this brilliant engineer. They do a 3-year stint. They get a top-secret SCI security clearance, which is worth its weight in gold, and they get experience operating against nation-state targets.
Very valuable experience.
What prevents them from immediately taking that resume and leaving for a $500,000 paycheck in the commercial tech industry?
Retention is the existential threat to military cyber operations. And the CSIS Commission addresses this by tackling the fundamental structural flaw in how the military handles promotions.
Which is?
In the traditional military, the promotion system is an up-or-out pyramid. And crucially, advancement forces skilled operators away from their craft.
Right.
To get promoted from a mid-level officer to a senior officer, you have to step away from the tactical edge and take on generic administrative, staff, or leadership roles. You have to prove you can manage large groups of people and massive budgets. You have to stop coding and start managing spreadsheets.
It is the most classic, infuriating corporate blunder of all time. It is exactly like taking your absolute best, most brilliant software developer, the person who essentially built your company's core product, and making them the vice president of human resources as a reward for their good work.
Yes.
And then management acts totally shocked when the company's software is suddenly terrible and the developer is miserable and quits. The military does this systematically.
They absolutely do. And in the cyber domain, the consequences of that traditional promotion path are disastrous because cyber skills are highly perishable.
Because the tech changes so fast.
Exactly. The technology stack, the adversary tactics, the specific zero-day vulnerabilities, they evolve in a matter of months, not years.
Yeah.
If you pull a top-tier cyber operator off the keyboard to go do a mandatory 3-year management tour at the Pentagon to check a box for their promotion board, their technical skills are effectively obsolete by the time they return to an operational unit.
So how does the new Cyberforce blueprint fix this up-or-out management trap?
By introducing what they call dual-track advancement. This isn't a military invention. This mirrors the best practices of the commercial tech industry. In companies like Google or Microsoft, you have two distinct, equally respected, and equally compensated paths to the very top of the organization.
Let's break those two tracks down because this is the core of their retention strategy. The first is the technical track, which is primarily designed for those warrant officers we just discussed.
Yes, the technical track focuses entirely on operations, capability development, and mission engineering. It is designed specifically to preserve deep, hands-on expertise and ensure long-term mission continuity.
Okay.
And here is the paradigm-shifting part for the military. Deep, narrow specialization is fully compatible with promotion. You can advance to the absolute senior-most warrant officer ranks while remaining a hands-on keyboard technical authority. You are never penalized for staying technical. You never have to command a desk to get a pay raise.
And the second path is the managerial track, which is geared toward the commissioned officers.
Correct. While the warrant officers are deep in the code, the commissioned officers on the managerial track focus on mission command, organizational leadership, and integrating cyber forces with the broader joint military force.
The big picture stuff.
Right. They're the ones talking to the Army generals and Navy admirals, coordinating how a cyber strike can support a physical troop movement. They still need deep technical fluency. They have to understand what the warrant officers are doing. But their day-to-day focus is on steering the ship, allocating resources, and navigating the bureaucracy, rather than building the engine.
This dual-track approach is vital. Finding the right career track where you are actually valued and promoted for what you do best rather than what an arbitrary system demands you do is everything.
It really is.
Which honestly is exactly why resources like securitycareers.help and CISOmarketplace.com are so invaluable for professionals navigating the civilian cybersecurity landscape. They understand that a one-size-fits-all career path doesn't work in this industry. If you are a deeply technical penetration tester, you shouldn't be forced into compliance management just to grow your career. Whether you're considering public service or climbing the private sector ladder, finding an environment that respects the dual-track reality is key.
It is a fundamental shift in how the military views human talent. By instituting these dual tracks, the Cyber Force is explicitly stating that remaining close to specialized, tactical mission work is a highly promotable, highly respected career choice.
But let's look at the elephant in the room. What about the elite talent that absolutely refuses to wear a military uniform?
Yeah.
No matter how well you pay them, no matter how logical the dual-track career path is, there is a massive demographic of brilliant hackers, engineers, and developers who simply have no desire to join the military. They don't want to salute, they don't want to meet physical fitness standards, and they don't want to be deployed. Does the Cyber Force just accept that they lose access to that brain trust?
Not at all. The blueprint recognizes that civilian expertise is not just a nice-to-have auxiliary feature. It is a permanent structural requirement for success in this domain.
Okay, so what's the plan?
The plan calls for 5,000 to 6,000 federal civilians to be permanently integrated into the Cyber Force. And we are not talking about administrative assistants or HR staff.
Right. The sources specify that these civilians will serve in highly technical core operational roles. We are talking about the capability developers writing the exploits, the on-net operators navigating adversary networks, and the mission engineers architecting the infrastructure.
Exactly.
These are people actively engaged in the daily digital fight, side by side with the warrant officers.
To recruit these people, the Cyber Force intends to leverage an initiative referred to as the U.S. Tech Force. This is envisioned as an elite core of commercial sector engineers who can deploy their cutting-edge, Silicon Valley-honed skills directly into national cybersecurity missions, but as federal civil servants.
And to compete with industry salaries, because you can't pay a senior developer on a standard federal GS pay scale. They are going to utilize something called cyber-accepted service pay scales.
Right.
This is a special authority that ensures these civilians receive targeted skill pay, putting their compensation on par with their military counterparts and making it at least competitive with the private sector. But this brings up a massive fundamental question for me.
What's that?
If we have military officers in uniform and we have defense contractors, which the DoD uses for literally everything from building jets to serving food in the cafeteria, why do we need this permanent middle layer of federal civilians? Why not just outsource all this complex software development and engineering to a massive defense contractor entirely? It seems like it would be infinitely easier than trying to recruit 6,000 elite federal employees.
It might seem easier from an HR perspective, sure. But outsourcing core cyber operations crosses a massive legal and operational red line.
How so?
There is a fundamental, profound difference between paying a civilian contractor to build a logistics app that tracks spare parts and paying a contractor to execute a military mission against a foreign adversary. You cannot outsource the legal and operational authority of waging war.
Because it is what the government calls an inherently governmental function.
Precisely. Let's look at a hypothetical. Suppose you hire a contractor to deploy a piece of offensive malware into a Russian server network. And let's say that contractor makes a mistake in the code, the malware escapes the target server, and it accidentally shuts down a civilian hospital in Moscow.
Oh, wow, that would be bad.
Who is legally responsible for that act of war? The CEO of the contracting firm, the individual coder. You instantly plunge into an international legal nightmare. Contractors operate under corporate liability. Military operations require sovereign state authority.
So there has to be a strict boundary.
An absolute boundary. Contractors will still exist within the Cyberforce ecosystem, but their role will be strictly bounded. They will handle surge capacity, they will build and maintain the unclassified IT infrastructure, and they will provide non-sensitive logistical support.
But not the triggers.
Right. The core mission authorities, the stewardship of long-term offensive resources, and the sensitive operational judgment about when, where, and how to fire a digital weapon, that must remain strictly within the hands of government personnel.
That makes perfect sense.
Yeah, either military members in uniform or sworn federal civilians who are legally accountable to the chain of command and the Constitution. The U.S. Tech Force concept allows the military to harness Silicon Valley-level engineering talent while maintaining that strict, non-negotiable governmental oversight and accountability.
Okay, so we have built the active duty force, we have our elite warrant officers on the keyboards, our commissioned officers managing the battle space, and our civilian tech force seamlessly integrated into the operations centers.
We're ready.
We are ready to fight the away game against foreign militaries. But what happens when the cyber attack hits domestic soil? What if an adversary decides not to attack a military base, but instead hacks a regional power grid in the Midwest, or the water treatment plant we talked about at the very beginning of the show?
That's the real nightmare scenario.
The active duty military, whether it's the Army or the new cyber force, has massive historic legal hurdles when it comes to operating domestically on civilian infrastructure.
You are referencing the Posse Comitatus Act, which generally forbids federal military troops from operating in a domestic law enforcement or domestic response capacity. And that legal friction is exactly where the Cyber National Guard comes in.
Right.
The CSIS Commission doesn't just suggest a Guard component, they heavily favor establishing a Cyber National Guard of roughly 3,500 to 5,000 personnel over creating a traditional Federal Reserve force.
Let's unpack the difference, because Guard and Reserve get used interchangeably by the public, but legally they are worlds apart. Why is a National Guard model so much better for infrastructure recovery?
It comes down to something called dual status flexibility. A traditional Federal Reserve force, like the Army Reserve, operates exclusively under federal authority, which is Title 10. They belong to the president.
Okay.
But the National Guard operates under a unique dual authority. They can be federalized under Title 10 to go fight overseas, but their primary day-to-day existence is under state authority, known as Title 32. They report to the governor of their state.
And why is that state authority so vital for cyber?
Because of the domestic incident response scenario you just described. Let's look at a real-world equivalent, like when the Colonial Pipeline was hit by a ransomware attack, or when hackers gained access to the water treatment plant in Oldsmar, Florida, and tried to poison the water supply.
Right, those were huge deals.
If a major civilian hospital network in Texas gets shut down by state-sponsored ransomware, the federal government cannot just unilaterally roll active-duty Cyberforce troops into that civilian hospital's private servers without triggering massive legal, jurisdictional, and privacy nightmares.
Too much red tape.
Exactly. But the governor of Texas, the governor can instantly activate the Texas Cyber National Guard under State Authority Title 32 to provide legal, rapid, and direct assistance to those civilian critical infrastructure owners during the crisis.
And the sources detail a very specific, highly specialized focus for this Guard force. They aren't just there to help the hospital reset its email passwords. The focus is on operational technology, or OT.
Yes.
We need to distinguish this from standard IT. IT is your information technology servers, laptops, databases. OT is the actual hardware and software that controls physical processes in the real
The
world.
physical stuff.
Right. OT is the digital valve that controls the flow of chemicals at the water plant. It is the complex switchgear on the regional power grid. It is the automated robotics on a manufacturing assembly line.
And defending OT is infinitely more complex and dangerous than defending IT. If an IT network goes down, you lose data. If an OT network is compromised, physical machines explode, power is cut to millions of people, and lives are immediately at risk. This raises an incredibly important question for military planners. How does the Department of Defense possibly train a 22-year-old soldier to deeply understand, operate, and protect the highly bespoke, incredibly varied, and often decades-old proprietary systems of a civilian power grid or a municipal water authority?
The genius answer of the commission is they don't even try.
Exactly. They don't try to train a soldier to do a civilian engineer's job. Instead, they recruit the civilian engineer who already runs that exact power grid. They give them a part-time uniform in the Cyber National Guard, and they utilize their inherent daily expertise.
Here is where this whole concept gets really interesting to me. It is effectively a digital volunteer fire department, but it is so much better than that.
How so?
Imagine if the volunteer firefighter who shows up to put out the blaze at your office building was actually the primary architect who designed and built that exact building in their day job.
Oh, that's a great analogy.
They know every hallway, every hidden conduit, every structural weakness. Because these Guard members are part-time citizen soldiers, they work their civilian day jobs in these critical industries, utilities, finance, healthcare. When a crisis hits and the Guard is activated, they bring that daily, cutting-edge commercial expertise and deep institutional knowledge directly to bear on the recovery mission.
It is arguably the most brilliantly efficient use of human capital in the entire blueprint. You are taking the nation's absolute best civilian defenders, people the military could never afford to employ full-time, and giving them a legal mechanism to serve their state and country in a crisis, utilizing the exact specialized skills they hone every single day in the private sector.
And just a quick reminder, connecting that kind of specialized civilian tech expertise with national security needs is exactly the kind of ecosystem that platforms like CISOmarketplace.com help facilitate. If you are that engineer working on OT systems in the private sector, understanding how your skills translate to broader security missions, whether that's consulting, joining a specialized task force, or just knowing the landscape, is critical.
So if we look at the board, we have the people in place. We have the active duty warrant officers, the commissioned leadership, the permanent civilians, and the dual status National Guard.
The dream team.
But having the best talent in the world is useless if they are shackled to a broken system. The next massive hurdle the report tackles is how this force actually operates and equips itself. Because if you take this elite 30,000-person cyber dream team, put them at their desks, and then force them to use traditional military procurement processes to buy their software, the whole system will immediately crash. They will lose every fight.
Let's talk about the military procurement wall. Historically, military procurement is famous for taking 10 years and billions of dollars to design, test, prototype, and finally build a new physical asset, like the F-35 fighter jet. It is a slow, methodical, heavily bureaucratic process designed to prevent taxpayer waste on hardware.
But in cyberspace, a 10-year acquisition cycle is multiple lifetimes. The domain moves at the speed of light. A digital capability or exploit developed today might be completely obsolete by next Tuesday because the adversary patched the vulnerability.
Wow, that fast.
The cyber force requires absolute architectural and operational velocity. They cannot wait 3 years for Congress to approve a budget line item to buy a new software tool.
The CSIS report addresses this by proposing a radically different funding model. They call for a unified color of money. They specifically reference something called flexible software appropriations, modeled on a pilot program known as BA08.
Yeah.
Let's translate this into plain English. Why is military money legally siloed in the first place?
Well, in the traditional military budget, Congress strictly divides funding into different colors or categories to maintain oversight. The two biggest categories relevant here are RDT&E, which stands for Research, Development, Test, and Evaluation, and O&M, which stands for Operations and Maintenance. By law, you use RDT&E money to invent and design a new weapon. Once the weapon is built and fielded, you use O&M money to use it, fix it, and maintain it. And Congress strictly forbids moving money between those two pots without extensive permission.
It's like having two restricted gift cards. You can only spend the RD Teeny gift card at the Science and Invention store, and you can only spend the O&M gift card at the mechanics shop.
Exactly. Which works fine if you are building an aircraft carrier. You research it for 5 years, you build it, and then you maintain it for 50 years. But software doesn't work like that.
Not at all.
Software isn't built once and then simply maintained. Software is in a state of continuous, real-time iteration. A cyber operator on a mission might discover a new, unmapped vulnerability in a target network. They immediately need a developer to research that vulnerability, write a custom exploit for it, test the code, and deploy it operationally. And they need all of that to happen within 48 hours.
Under the old system, they would have to stop the operation, request RDT money to develop the exploit, wait for approval, build it, and then request O&M money to actually use it. By the time the paperwork clears, the target has moved.
Precisely why the BA08 model is so critical. BA08 essentially turns those restricted gift cards into cash. It eliminates the legal wall between research and operations for software.
Oh, that's huge.
It gives Cyberforce commanders a single, unified budget. This allows them to dynamically shift funds on an hourly basis, whether they need to suddenly buy an off-the-shelf commercial tech solution to solve an immediate problem, or fund an internal team of developers to build a custom tool at tactical speed.
And to fully utilize that financial agility, the Commission proposes tearing down the organizational walls as well. They want a pooled developer unit. In the legacy military, if you are a technical specialist, you are permanently assigned to a specific unit, say, the 1st Brigade for 3 years. If 1st Brigade isn't doing anything, you sit idle. If 2nd Brigade desperately needs your specific skill, they can't have you. The Cyberforce would eliminate that. They would keep all their software developers in a dynamic, centralized pool.
It treats human talent as a fluid, highly maneuverable asset rather than fixed hardware. If an operational task force suddenly encounters a target network heavily reliant on obscure mobile platform architecture, the Cyberforce commander doesn't have to spend months trying to reassign personnel.
They just grab them from the pool.
Right. They simply reach into the developer pool, extract a concentration of mobile platform experts, and allocate them to that task force in real time based on the actual immediate mission need. Once the mission is over, the developers return to the pool.
And they take this agility a step further with what I think is the coolest organizational concept in the whole report. They call them fused units of action, or the Cyber Combined Arms Squadron. They essentially want to collapse the physical and bureaucratic distance between the person writing the code and the person firing the digital weapon.
In traditional DoD acquisitions, the process is painfully linear. An operator on the front line identifies a need. They write a formal requirement document. That document goes up the chain of command, gets approved, goes to an acquisition officer who sends it to a defense contractor.
Sounds exhausting.
It is. The contractor takes 2 years to build the software, hands it back to the military, and by the time it reaches the original operator, the operator says, "This isn't what I needed," and the target doesn't even use this operating system anymore.
So how does the Combined Arms Squadron fix that?
By putting everyone in the same room. The Cyber Combined Arms Squadron integrates the on-net operators, the software developers, the acquisition officers who control the money, and the legal advisors into a single fused command loop. It is bringing the concept of cradle-to-grave DevOps inside a tactical military unit.
I want to paint a picture of how this works in practice. Let's say a warrant officer is actively navigating a foreign network and hits a newly implemented security roadblock. They don't fill out a form and wait a year. They literally look across the operations floor to the developer sitting 20 feet away and say, "I need a custom script to bypass this specific firewall."
Exactly.
The developer starts coding it. The acquisition officer standing behind them uses that BA08 flexible money to instantly purchase a commercial software library the developer needs to finish the script. The embedded legal advisor reviews the intended use of the script to ensure it complies with international law and the current rules of engagement. And once it's greenlit, the operator executes it.
Fast.
The entire process takes hours, not years,
Mhm.
all under one roof.
The velocity of the cyber domain absolutely demands it. If an adversary discovers a zero-day vulnerability in our systems, or if we discover one in theirs, the United States cannot wait for a 3-year contracting cycle to build a defense or an exploit. The fused unit of action allows the force to identify a threat, engineer the countermeasure, legally authorize it, and deploy it at the speed of relevance.
And to make sure that these developers and operators are actually capable of operating at that extreme cutting edge, the report mandates something called continuous immersion. They acknowledge that military schoolhouses alone are not enough. personnel will be required to constantly update their skills in the civilian world. We are talking about mandatory rotational tours where military operators go work at major tech firms for 6 months to learn commercial best practices.
And attending major hacker conferences.
Yes. I love this detail. The military is essentially codifying into law that they want their operators to take off the uniform for a week, go to DEF CON or Black Hat in Las Vegas, hang out with the global community of white hat hackers, learn absolutely everything they can about the newest vulnerabilities being discovered in the wild, and bring that knowledge straight back to the Pentagon.
It is an absolute strategic necessity.
Mm-hmm.
The private sector, the academic world, and the independent security research community are where the cyber domain is actually being shaped and defined.
Not the military.
Right. The military does not have a monopoly on technical innovation. If the cyber force insulates itself inside classified vaults and ignores the open source community, they will become obsolete almost immediately.
So to sustain all of this, to manage the dual-track promotions, to oversee the integration of the civilian tech force, to run the National Guard, and to build these fused DevOps squadrons, the cyber force has to build its own foundational institutional infrastructure.
Yes, they do.
And Section 7 of the blueprint makes it incredibly clear that these institutions are going to look very, very different from traditional military academies like West Point or Annapolis.
The foundation of any military service is how it trains, sustains, and informs its people. And the Commission recognized that traditional training models are a vulnerability. They recommend establishing a dedicated force generation and training command.
But this isn't just a traditional boot camp or a schoolhouse where you go once for 6 months and then you are considered trained for the rest of your career.
No, because as we've established, cyber skills perish rapidly. Training cannot be a linear event. It has to be a continuous, immersive loop. The report specifically warns against a highly dangerous phenomenon called training drift.
Let's define training drift for the listeners.
Training drift is what happens in legacy bureaucratic systems. The official military schoolhouse spends 2 years developing a curriculum based on what the adversary was doing 2 years ago. They teach that curriculum to new recruits.
Oh, I see where this is going.
Meanwhile, the actual operators deployed in the field are facing an adversary that has entirely changed its tactics. So the operators have to throw out the rulebook and figure out the current reality on the fly. The schoolhouse drifts completely out of sync with the battlefield reality.
So how does the new training command stop the drift?
By institutionalizing a permanent, high-speed feedback loop. The Cyberforce Training Command won't rely on static textbooks. The current active operators, the warrant officers who are fresh off the keyboards from executing live missions, will be the ones constantly rewriting and updating the curriculum based on real-time threat intelligence. The training environment will be an exact, mirrored simulation of the current global threat landscape.
And speaking of threat intelligence, the cyber force needs its own dedicated apparatus to understand the adversary. Every military branch has its own intelligence center. The Navy has the Office of Naval Intelligence to track foreign submarines. The Army has the National Ground Intelligence Center to analyze foreign tank capabilities. The report calls for the creation of the Cyber Force Intelligence Center.
Which is absolutely critical. This center would be dedicated entirely to the cyberspace domain. They would focus heavily on signals intelligence and OSINT open source intelligence. But more importantly, they are tasked with developing foundational intelligence regarding adversary cyber forces.
Meaning they aren't just looking at the code the adversary uses, they're looking at the people writing the code.
Exactly.
They need to know the target profiles. Who are the commanders of the Chinese military hacking units? What buildings do they work in? What physical infrastructure? Which undersea cables? Which server farms in which country supports their foreign networks? They have to map the entire digital and physical ecosystem of the enemy.
And while the intelligence center looks outward at the adversary, the cyber force also has to look inward to protect itself. The blueprint proposes dedicated counterintelligence and criminal investigative divisions, an MDCO and an MCIO.
Let's unpack why a cyber branch needs its own internal police and spy catchers.
Because U.S. adversaries are constantly using cyberspace not just for attacks, but for espionage, intellectual property theft, and sabotage against both military and domestic industrial targets.
Right.
The traditional military investigative services like NCIS or Army CID do incredible work, but investigating a complex digital espionage ring requires a highly specific skill set. The cyber force needs its own specialized federal agents who are native to the domain.
Specialized agents.
Agents who operate at the exact intersection of advanced cyber operations, federal law enforcement, and deep counterintelligence. They need to hunt the moles and track the digital spies trying to infiltrate the cyber force itself.
And then there is the legal aspect, which might be the most complex piece of this entire puzzle. The blueprint calls for a dedicated Cyber Force JAG Corps. JAG stands for Judge Advocate General. They are the military's lawyers. I want you to think about how fast the user agreement or the privacy policy on your smartphone apps update. Now, imagine the laws governing international digital warfare, the Geneva Conventions, trying to keep pace with the evolution of zero-day exploits and AI-driven malware. It is nearly impossible.
International cyber law is an incredibly murky, highly volatile legal frontier. If an adversary launches a physical cruise missile and it destroys a building, it is unambiguously an act of war. The legal response is clear.
Right.
But what happens if an adversary deploys a piece of malware that subtly alters the data in a civilian financial clearinghouse, causing economic chaos? Or what if a line of code turns off the cooling system in a civilian data center, causing the servers to physically catch fire?
Good point.
Is that espionage? Is it vandalism? Or does it cross a threshold of an armed attack under international law?
And the operators sitting at the keyboards need to know the legal boundaries of what they're allowed to do in response. If an operator wants to deploy a countermeasure that might accidentally briefly disrupt a server located in a neutral allied country, they need a lawyer to tell them if that constitutes an illegal act of aggression.
Exactly. And right now, the legacy system fails because it uses generalist military lawyers transferring in and out of cyber commands.
Oh, because they rotate.
Right. A traditional judge advocate might spend 3 years doing a tour handling standard military justice, prosecuting court-martials for misconduct on an Army base. Then they get rotated into cybercom for 2 years, where they are suddenly expected to advise a commander in real time on the legal implications of a covert digital strike involving complex BGP routing protocols.
That's a huge leap.
And just as they finally start to understand the technology, their tour is up, and they rotate out to a logistics command to review contract law. They never develop the necessary profound depth of expertise.
So the Cyberforce JAG Corps solves this by keeping the lawyers in the domain permanently. They will have specialized legal professionals embedded directly into the service, lawyers who understand the actual source code of the malware, who understand the technical nuances of navigating covert digital actions, and who spend their entire careers mastering the intersection of international law and cyberspace.
They will be just as specialized as the warrant officers they are advising.
Bringing all of these complex elements together, the specialized warrant officers, the civilian tech force, the DevOps squadrons, the continuous training, the dedicated intelligence and legal corps, is a monumental undertaking.
There really is.
You cannot just pass a law, flip a switch, and expend a highly functional 30,000-person military branch to exist the next morning, which is why the final major recommendation of the report stresses the absolute necessity of phased growth.
The Commission explicitly warns against the danger of growth for growth's sake. They know that if Congress just dumps $10 billion and a mandate for 30,000 people on a new commander's desk, the immediate result will be catastrophic bureaucratic bloat. People just start hiring middle managers to fill seats.
So what's the plan?
The implementation plan is highly deliberate and aggressively gated. Phase 1 is just setting the foundational conditions. It involves a core team of maybe 10 to 20 strategic planners outlining the exact doctrine and policies. Phase 2 moves to an initial operating capacity of around 500 personnel, just enough to test the fused unit of action concept and the unified budget authorities to prove they actually work.
Phase 3 is iterative growth, scaling up the systems that pass the test to roughly 1,000 personnel. And Phase 4 is the long-term fine-tuning, scaling up to the target of 10,000 active duty over several years, slowly bringing in the rest of the force. They want to meticulously prove the model works at a micro level before they inflate it to a macro level.
They want to completely avoid inheriting the bureaucratic bloat and the legacy inefficiencies of the Army, Navy, and Air Force. They are building a bespoke capability for a bespoke domain, and that requires immense patience, precision, and discipline from both military leaders and Congress.
So we have covered an absolutely massive amount of ground here today, exploring a fundamental reimagining of American defense. Let's summarize the monumental undertaking outlined in this blueprint.
Let's do it.
The CSIS Commission is calling for extracting all cyber operations out of the legacy military branches, ending the chaos of mismatched priorities. It proposes eliminating the traditional enlisted force entirely, opting instead for a highly compensated, deeply technical corps of elite warrant officers. It demands the permanent integration of the U.S. tech force, bringing civilian commercial engineering talent to the front lines. It deploys a dual-status cyber national guard focused specifically on recovering our domestic operational technology and infrastructure during a crisis. And it completely rewrites the rules on procurement and organizational structure, merging developers, operators, and lawyers into single units so the military can actually move and fight at the speed of software.
It is a total paradigm shift. It is the long overdue institutional recognition that the heavy, mass-based tools and bureaucratic structures of the industrial age absolutely cannot win the hyper-fast, highly technical wars of the information age.
And if you're listening to this and wondering, why should I care about the internal organizational chart of the Pentagon? I want you to remember the scenario we painted at the very beginning of this deep dive. The battlefield isn't a foreign shore anymore.
Not at all.
It is the banking system you use every single day to pay your mortgage. It is the water you drink from your kitchen tap. It is the electrical grid that powers your home, keeps your family warm, and keeps your local hospitals running. This proposed cyber force isn't just being designed to fight foreign militaries in some abstract digital ether. It is being designed specifically from the ground up to ensure that the foundational digital fabric of your daily life holds strong against relentless nation-state threats.
And if we step back and look at the absolute totality of this blueprint, it raises a final, truly profound question about the future of warfare. If this blueprint succeeds, well, if we successfully build a cyber national guard where the civilian tech workers running the grid and the military operators defending it are essentially the exact same people wearing different hats.
Right.
And if we have civilian tech companies and federal civil servants deeply and permanently integrated into core offensive military operations, what actually happens to the historical legal line between civilian infrastructure and military targets in the next global conflict?
That's a great question.
Under the laws of war, militaries are legitimate targets. Civilians are not. But if the civilian power grid is actively defended by the military, and the military relies entirely on the civilian power grid to project force, and the people running both are interchangeable, does that line protecting civilian infrastructure even exist anymore? Or does the entire society become the battle space?
Wow. That is exactly the kind of massive, unsettling implication that will keep you up at night, and it's exactly why this domain requires such careful architectural planning. So what does this all mean for us? It means the future of defense is already here, it is profoundly complex, and it looks absolutely nothing like the physical wars of the past. A huge thank you again to CISOmarketplace.com and securitycareers.help for making this deep dive possible and for providing the resources to help navigate this exact intersection of tech and security. Keep exploring, keep questioning the systems that run the world around you, and we'll catch you on the next deep dive.